Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. Before we get started this week, just a quick heads up that if you're building in Web3, the next class of the Techstars Web3 accelerator takes place in spring 2024, and applications are open now. As Web3 is global and borderless, so is Techstars Web3. Although most of the accelerator content is delivered virtually, the class does meet up in person for a week at a time at the beginning, middle, and end of the program in different cities around the world. Jump on over to techstars.com/accelerators/web3 to apply. On the show this week, we've ported over an episode of the Somi Arian podcast that I did recently. Somi is the founder and CEO of InPeak, an innovative platform enabling creators and businesses to build and monetize communities. Somi is also an award-winning filmmaker, tech philosopher, and author whose work sits at the intersection of AI, blockchain, and the future of work. Her 2018 documentary, The Millennial Disruption, won several international awards and featured industry leaders from The Economist, Marie Claire, Bentley, JLR, and Steinway. I connected with Somi Arian back in 2021 thanks to an intro from Dublin friend Paul Price, and I stayed in touch with her as she built her InPeak business. When Somi recently asked me if she could interview me for her podcast, I initially thought it would be a chat about my path into venture capital, but this one turned out to be a lot more than that. Our discussion became a deep dive into the entrepreneur's dilemma of solving problems versus fulfilling desires, customer discovery, jobs to be done frameworks, product building, and pivots, all baked into a live startup mentoring session. Somi and I really hammered into the choice that an entrepreneur has between solving a problem, fulfilling a desire, or doing both. We commonly find this dilemma in Web3, but it originated in Web2. If you're a startup founder, I will tell you until you're blue in the face that your startup needs to be solving a painful problem for a big market of people who are feeling that pain regularly, whether it's a professional pain point or a personal pain point. But not every startup you see doing well is solving an obvious problem for the direct user. Sometimes the startup is just fulfilling a desire. Take social networks. Their goal is to bring people with shared interests closer together, as that desire to be part of something bigger than themselves creates an attention span, and that attention span is monetizable. With that, the desire to be fulfilled is that of the individual user, you and me. And the problem to solve belongs to the social network's true customers, brands having a hard time monetizing their audiences through other advertising channels. The message in this for startup founders is that when you set out to build, make sure you're solving a big problem. And if you're also fulfilling a desire, just know who you're serving with what proposition, and that both of these markets are worth pursuing. So let's dive right into the entrepreneur's dilemma with Somi Arian, all right here on Money Never Sleeps.
So Pete, you have been so helpful with your advice to me for quite some time, and I've never had you on the podcast, so this is great to have you on the pod and have a little bit of conversation that other people can listen to as well and see the kind of advice that I've been getting. The way I treat these conversations is like more of a advisory session, and then sure. I record that and hopefully my questions are also relevant to other founders. So first things first, I should mention that my voice is probably shakier than usual because I have been on Zoom calls around 14 to 15 hours a day for the past few weeks.
All right.
We are going through a transition and pivoting. So we will talk a little bit about that in our platform. But I guess first things first, maybe you can talk a little bit about from your observation of, the number of startup founders that you talk to. How often do you see startup founders having to pivot in their journey within the first few years from what they start out with, the vision that they start out with, to where they are, say, 3 years later? Is this very common, or is it just me?
It's incredibly common. It's incredibly common. And it's the whole idea is that you got to get out there and talk to customers. And I still feel funny saying that, talk to customers, because they're not your customers yet. They're people who could become your customers. And when you're not yet sure what your business model is, you could be talking directly to individuals or you could be talking to businesses. And that's where things just get hairy. So with Techstars, we have our mentor madness period at the beginning of every Techstars program. And the whole idea is that you put everybody through the grinder. And what generally tends to happen is that when you spend 20 minutes explaining your business, or actually it's 3 minutes explaining your business, and then 17 minutes of trying to find a match with that mentor. And you're explaining that and you're having that conversation, 40, 50 times over the course of 2 weeks, that you're either going to come out of that with, well, your assumptions have been confirmed and you're going in the right direction, or it's like, wait a second, that's not going to work. And you go back to the drawing board. And we see that happen to companies that come into Techstars, is that we really like them as founders, but you then put them in front of a bunch of experts, a bunch of people that would either perhaps invest in the business or just help them as mentors. And if it's not clear on what it is that they're doing and how they're going to sell it, you go back to the drawing board and you say, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Who am I trying to solve that for? How big is that market? And can I go talk to at least 30 people if it's B2B, business to business, or 100 people if it's B2C, business to customer or to consumer? And you collect tons of data. And generally, by the time you get 60% of the way through, you figure out, okay, I know what this customer group's main needs are. And you then, well, the word pivot is thrown around so much, but you then decide, well, we're going to go in a new direction. And if you can figure that out in the first 3 to 6 months of your life as a business, or even in the first year, that's good. If you build something and get it to market, and then you realize that, Jesus, this revenue figure just isn't going the direction we need it to, come up with a great problem to solve, but can we get people to buy it? That is where I see companies in, like you said, in the first 2-3 years of their life, 4, 5, 6 times they're changing direction. And it's, the ones that are changing direction, that that they're going to go through brick walls to get themselves into position with their business so that it's successful.
Yeah, 100%. When you said talk to customers, there was a time that I would think, yeah, like all you have to do is just like schedule, 30 calls a day and start talking to, potentially the type of people that you want to attract. But how do you deal with running out of energy?
Don't do 30. Don't do 30. You want to do 5 or 6 a day, and you only want to do that over a month period, right? And it's not a sales pitch. It is not, hey, we designed this, want to pitch it to you and want to let you ask some questions. This is you going through and saying, we think we've got a solution here for a problem, and you describe it in a nutshell, whatever it is that you're trying to solve. And then you're trying to gather information from that potential customer. And there is a framework called Jobs to be Done that I've been a kind of student from afar for a number of years on, since I learned about this about 5 years ago. And then I Google, I get some, checklists, I get some descriptions of it, and I give it to founders all the time and say, just go through this. And at the core of it is just trying to find out what is really making your customer tick. And there's this great story that Clayton Christensen, may he rest in peace, he wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. And he used this to figure out how to sell more milkshakes at McDonald's in the United States of America, in the Midwest, in the middle of nowhere, where people are driving normally an hour to an hour and a half a day to get to their job destination in the morning. And it was basically trying to figure out what was the best way to sell more milkshakes. What was it that people wanted? They wanted something that kept them full, or where kept them occupied on the way, on the drive, something that they enjoyed, and something that meant they were full when they got to the office and they weren't going to look for more food. And a banana didn't work because it wasn't all that filling. A bagel was too messy. But a milkshake, for some reason, they found out between the hours of 6:30 and 8:30 in the morning in this one McDonald's franchise adjacent to an interstate highway, was selling a lot of milkshakes. And it was like, how do we make it easier? Do we offer new flavors? Do we have different levels of thickness? No, their answer was move it out from behind the counter, move it out to the front of the shop. So it's very easy and frictionless for people to actually buy milkshakes. And they sold even more. So that was just very simply, what is it that you want? What are you looking to do? And I've seen these jobs to be done frameworks. They focus on, hey, what did you have for breakfast today? When the last time you experienced this problem, what were you going through? What was in your mind that day? And it's really just trying to get this information out. And it can seem exhausted. It can seem pointless, but the information that you gather from that can be incredibly enlightening and really help you to truly understand the problem that you're solving. And I could think of probably a couple of examples for the direction you're going, Somi, where that could be applicable.
Yeah, tell me more about that in the direction. So maybe for people who may not have the context, InPeak started out as FemPeak. We were going to be building a network for women in business and technology. Turned out that that market was too small. The other problem is that expectation that a female network was supposed to be nonprofit for so many reasons. This was the expectation. So when I talked to investors, that's how people saw it. For example, we got Morgan Stanley as one of our first clients, but it went into their diversity bucket, right? So it just was like not exactly the positioning that we wanted it to be. And because other female networks have been using that type of framework and that type of positioning, it was very hard for us to shake that image. So we rebranded to InPeak, and essentially we wanted to build a network. I have always wanted to build a social network since the beginning of social networking. When I watched Facebook and then I got into LinkedIn. So for me, I saw a lot of things that were wrong with these existing social networks, and I wanted to build the next iteration of a social network that I thought that it should be how it is. And the way that I thought it should be how it is that as a creator, you should be able to own your data. You should be able to own the relationship between you and your audience. When you post things, your audience should be able to see them. It should not be in a position where you are on most other social networks that you build an audience, you work so hard to build an audience, but then you post things and you can't even guarantee that they will see it because it's not in the interest of, say, Instagram or LinkedIn to show you that information because they have their own agenda. So essentially you've been like a cow milked, that you've been used to generate content for that platform, but then people don't own the relationship between them and their audience. When Web3 came along, it was a promise to solve that problem. And I could see that with token gated communities, you could create this concept of building a social network around communities. However, I always say Web3 has got three problems. Problem number one is overly complicated. Problem number two is regulation. And the third one is hyper-financialization. Because of the nature of the kind of people that came into Web3 being really hyper-financialized, hyper-focused around, the finances, it made it really hard for Web3 to proliferate, at least in its first iteration, the way that we thought it would. So Web3 has taken a step back. We have already built the foundations of the platform for a social network. But the way we see this social network is very different. When people say social network, they think about, people are posting and other people are seeing. But what we are thinking about is a social network that is built around education and learning and professional networking. So you build these clusters, these communities. Each community has got its own live sessions. They have their own on-demand content. They have their own forum. And then there is a collaboration opportunity between the communities. So in that sense, it's very different from, say, something like Discord, because Discord, each channel is closed and they never interact with each other. Whereas on the platform that we are building, eventually there's going to be a homepage where people can see different communities that they're part of. They can see the latest things from them. They can collaborate. They can invite each other to each other's content. And Web3 technology made so much sense for this because it was very easy to connect communities through their smart contracts. But now, without Web3, without the smart contract, we are having to figure out a new way of doing this. So now we are creating email gating, and then we are creating, instead of a smart contract, a long numeric code and a name for each community, and then creating these drop-down menus so that people can collaborate with each other from these different angles. So this was a long-winded way of saying, this is kind of like an explanation of, how we started from FemPeak to InPeak to where we're going now.
Yeah. And I have a couple of questions for you, but first, and we talked about this before. I mean, your fourth thing about Web3, you mentioned 3, there's 4. The fourth one is it's a tiny market.
Yeah, that's another problem,
and 80 to 85% of the people that were in it for the heat of the token flipping. So that you had a very small proportion of your audience likely that was, hey, truly believe in the direction you're going. You're right about all of this. It's a bit early. And that for Web3 businesses to succeed right now, they need to be able to sell to Web2. So I think what you're doing is that you're repositioning the business so that you can sell to Web2. And that some of the technology that you've built, you can put a new skin on that in order to make it simple and easier to bring Web2 users on board. And that's happening across crypto. That's happening across Web3. So you're in good company, Somi. But I think looking at building a network and building a social network, like you said, around education and training and professional connections, you still are coming back to the main question with any startup is, what problem are you solving? Okay. Now, in Web3 and in other places as well that are not Web3, there is a flip side to that question of what problem you're solving. It's that, what desire are you fulfilling? Okay. And that is where social networks start to plug in. So my question for you is, when you're thinking about perhaps the community of venture capital firms, investment syndicates that operate like venture capital firm or look for the same deal flow, the startups that they invest in, looking at that community, there's tons out there. There's a huge educational requirement out there, not only for startups on how the VC world works, but the VC world on how new and different strands of, new verticals around technology and what's at play and what makes sense. What should I be paying attention to? What should I not be paying attention to? How do I match, if I'm a VC, how do I match up my true core capabilities with some new, with AI, right? If I'm a fintech VC, am I ever actually going to think about might I invest in an AI company that is servicing financial services, right? That is fintech. And what are the types of questions? Who are the people in my network that I can go to that could help me answer some of these questions around this? When we talk about going and talking to 30 potential users, 30 potential customers, 30 for B2B and 100 for B2C, what are the types of questions that you're going to ask them to truly find out what you would want to do for them?
That's super interesting. To answer your question of what is the problem we're solving or the desire that we're fulfilling, it's the ability to have deep connections or to build deep connections and learn about deep topics in a way that you can't go on Udemy to learn about building a startup. You can't go on Masterclass, because the Masterclass to me is one of the most useless things ever, because I probably shouldn't say that, but because I feel like it's so surface level. Like I watched Malcolm Gladwell's, writing, right? Like, and I didn't learn anything. It's just so surface level, so not deep enough. Whereas in an environment where you can have these webinars, where you can go into breakout rooms, have like really close conversation with people and ask them directly questions that are on kind of like this is why I love doing this podcast, because I can have these deep conversations. And what we want to do on the platform is really replicate what I have on this podcast with amazing mentors like yourself. We want to now replicate that for on a mass level for startup founders and VCs and investors, family offices, emerging fund managers, all of those things. So at least that will be like our initial audience. And then as it grows, then those startup founders can then use the platform to build their own audiences for other niche areas. And the reason why we are focusing on emerging sectors, I have a deep belief as a founder that you should focus on something that you are passionate about. And I'm deeply passionate about emerging spaces, like, emerging technologies. And I think that there is a real gap, that there are things like, for example, I'm really deep into health span and longevity. And I take this thing called rapamycin, which is a experimental anti-aging drug. Now there is a forum for it, and there's like a website that is specifically dedicated to that. And I can see an opportunity, and so many people don't necessarily know about rapamycin, but I can see an opportunity for our platform to be a place where people discover these new, and exciting discoveries, and they can build an audience. So if our platform can be a space for startup founders, because I think that that's where the deepest insights come from the latest things that are being worked on in science, in technology. And there are people who are early adopters that want to learn about these things. And by the time it hits Masterclass or Udemy or other kind of first of all, it probably never will get to those places, but even by the time it does, just so much older. So that's, I believe that's the desire and the problem, that we are addressing, to be a space for deep conversations and deep learning, deep connections for emerging spaces.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Somi, is that there's the desire side of it, the desire to do everything you just talked about, the desire to connect, the desire to learn, the desire to grow your network. And it's not just for networking purposes. It's because I do this myself, is that I curate my network as much as I can, because having conversations with people gives me new insights about the investments I'm about to make. And I ask those that I'm close with, whether they're investors or experts, mentors, say, can you talk to this founder, please? I think I'm missing part of the story here because I don't have the experience or the capability in this one area in order to ask the right questions. Can you please do that for me? Right? So we're doing two things there. We're fulfilling a desire to help me curate my network, right? And to stay close with people and learn at the same time, but also then help me to do my job, right? Which is due diligence on founders and due diligence on potential investment opportunities and making the right decisions about what to invest in and then how to work with those founders. That's a different conversation completely. So what I'm thinking is that you've got an excellent grasp on the desire side of it, but on the problem side, what you expressed at the very beginning when I asked you is the same thing that I get from founders all the time, is that when I ask them the problem, they do a reverse of the solution, right? An inability to do X, an inability to build their network and educate themselves and learn in the way that they would like to. So back to the problem. With the options that are out there today, we don't want to get into a competitive landscape assessment here. We do not want to, because you need to think beyond that when you're doing this. It's a critically important thing to do and to figure out what to watch for. But how do you dig into and drill into this collection of things that are a headache for people, right? And is this a painkiller that you have, or is it a vitamin? I'll say it the American way, a vitamin. And a painkiller is something when you have a headache, you leaving your house, you get into the car, you're like, oh, I forgot to take my painkiller. I'm going to go back inside. When you're pulling out of the house, driving away, you say, oh, I forgot to take my supplement today, my vitamin C, whatever, my mega vitamin. Am I going to go back in the house? Am I going to drive back and do it? Nope, I'll take it later, right? So that vitamin fulfills a desire. That vitamin allows you to supplement your health, supplement your diet, do whatever you want. But the other side of it, solving the problem, is the painkiller. What is the pain that you're killing?
Well, first of all, I would say that depending on who you are, the supplement might be super important.
True.
Like for
that's
like
why I know you're a very smart person, Somi, because you answered
that. I really think for the audience that we are going for, which is the startup founders who are extremely smart, obviously they wouldn't be building in emerging sectors. and for VCs and fund managers, etc., that are looking to discover new talent. Look, if you think that as somebody who is like sitting on the other side of writing me a check, that I need to reposition this in a way that to you it looks like a painkiller, I can do that. But I would also argue that there is an audience for whom the supplement is is equally as important. And I am the person that would go back to get, or if I can't, I would just buy it somewhere else again.
Well, let's turn it around, right? So taking that supplement, what is the problem I'm solving by taking that supplement? I'm fulfilling a desire, but you know what? I feel like because I don't eat or drink dairy, I'm not getting enough vitamin D.
Yeah.
That's a problem because, longer term bone deficiency, right? So I need to do something about that. That solves a problem. So in your space, a startup, geez, I'm just not in the right circles.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about fundraising. I don't know enough about doing jobs to be done frameworks. And if I'm a VC, I just don't have the right connections to fill the gaps when I really like a founder, but I'm not sure about the technical side of it. Okay. So what we've just done there is flipped it from fulfilling a desire of, I want to learn more, I want to be more connected, I want to educate, to, I really do have a problem here. And finding those startups and finding those VCs, like I'm very familiar with a VC who is going through this same thing right now, where they're saying, listen, we've got some great people, they're really smart, they're great investors, but nobody knows we're here. And as a VC these days, you can't just sit back and wait for the deals to come to you, or else you're just going to get, you got to get not the best ones. You got to go out and be able to find them. And to be able to find them, you need people to know that you're there. And for people to know you're there, you've got to create content.
Yeah.
Or
in the old days,
it was go do an event, right?
So I was going to speak about the events with you. That one of the things I find about going to conferences, which is quite frustrating, is that I had this experience in Consensus where you meet lots of people and everybody's just really quick to exchange Telegram with you, but you don't build a deep enough connection. You don't really have enough of a conversation that you will remember them. And then the moment you go away, those connections fizzle out. Whereas with a community like ours, because you will keep coming back to these events during the week, you start to build relationships. And you get to know people. And like there's so many people I met at these conferences that I don't even remember. I put people into folders, but it's not like on a daily basis. There's no reason for me to message them. So to keep those relationships alive. Whereas one of the things that I loved about Web3 with like Discord and with events and things like that was that you actually got to know people. And after a while, you knew, even if like you didn't know their real name, even if they were pseudonymous, you started to kind of get a sense for this person was a presence in your life, and or that avatar was a presence in your life, and you knew that you could actually reach out to them and talk to them. So I think that is one of the biggest things. That the other thing I would say, as somebody who lives in London and so many of these events happen in the US, traveling, it's just so expensive, so hard to constantly travel to conferences. Whereas our platform essentially will provide the ability for communities to hang out with each other without having to constantly travel. And you can build those relationships. And some of those relationships can be stronger and more meaningful than, spending a week in a conference. So there's just some of them.
Oh, we could talk forever about conferences. I mean, in a nutshell, it's that you go to a conference if you have a speaking slot. Ideally, you're not paying for a ticket, right? Or you've decided to sponsor because you've got the ability to do that from a cash flow perspective. And you think that is an audience that when they see your name, that will work, right? And that will get people to buy what you're selling, right? Other than that, going to a conference is you find out who's going, you look at the page where all the sponsors are listed, who's going from the sponsors that you think you want to meet. Try to reach out to them in advance and set up meetings. And you go and you do your meetings, and then you leave and you go to the side events. And you pick out the side events that are in your niche. And that's where you go and you have more of those meaningful conversations. So I used to go to conferences and I'd walk around like a lost puppy for hours and just continually do these circuits and see who I could bump into. But you got to go with a plan, right? And and I totally get that point about saying, how can we create these stronger connections where instead of going to conferences, you put people into that niche, you put people into that virtual side event, right? Where people know that they're going to be able to have an interesting conversation with somebody because they're in that space and they're following the same trends and themes that you follow. So I think that's a strong thread to pull on, is what I'm saying. And it's going to come back to, hey, do you have enough of a niche in the earliest days of people who you are solving that problem for, right? Of, I don't feel like I'm in enough circles. I don't feel like I have the right connections. I can do better. And then from that point on, what will naturally happen is when you can move this to fulfill a desire, that desire is going to be, hey, I keep hearing about this network. I keep hearing that people that I know that are on that, I need to get on that network. And that is fear of missing out, right? And you're solving that problem, or it's a, desire at the same time. So I think it's, again, at the earliest days, focusing on the problem and being able to get money from people who you're truly killing a pain for.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, your suggestion is to always talk from a painkiller point of view and not a supplement point of view.
To get in the earliest days, you need to. And the earliest days of Coinbase, for example, the problem they were solving was that it was really, really hard to buy Bitcoin. Now look where they are, right? They've gone way beyond that. As opposed to saying, hey, I have a desire to get into crypto. That wasn't the problem. They weren't fulfilling that desire. They were just saying, hey, it's really hard to hold Bitcoin for people that are in it right now. And then let's go on down the road, down the years, and attract a whole bunch of users, right? So, that's where you're going.
Well, from a B2C point of view, that's how, we can describe it, what we just said about, you're solving the problem of people connecting, etc. But from a B2B point of view, we're solving yet another problem. And that one is, for me, is even more tangible. And that is, as a founder or as a creator. Now, as a creator, you may be a VC creating content for your portfolio companies. You may be a coach creating content for your clients. So as a creator, we solve a real problem, and that is, you own the relationship between yourself and your audience. You're not building an audience, you're building a community. There's a difference between a community and an audience. On social media, you build an audience. On our platform, you build a community. And then you own the data. You can see who has watched what, how much of it has watched. So, like, if you want to upsell to them, if you want to, monetize, I don't know, merchandise or whatever that you might want to think about, you can do all of those things in a way that you wouldn't be able to do on, say, YouTube or other places, because you can't see exactly. So on YouTube, on LinkedIn, you get aggregate data. You don't get exact data. And then with your audience, you have all their emails. So it's entirely puts the power in your hand as a creator, and the way that you manage your community. So I think that was, like, from the very beginning, that was the thing that my problem as a creator on LinkedIn was, that, like, I've got 80,000 followers on LinkedIn, but I have no control over whether when I post something they see it. I don't know, I don't know exactly who is watching what. And even if I do, I don't have a way of reaching out to them. It's not like I can post something and see, okay, these people looked at this video, so I can then email them and say, hey, I saw that you saw this video. Would you like to right? Couldn't do that. So that's one of the problems.
I know. Yeah. And, helping, again, it's fulfilling desire. And even I fall into it myself, which is, what is the solution? Helping people build communities. The problem is that I don't have enough of a group of people or businesses that are aware of what I do, that want to engage with each other, that will help me to fulfill my business objectives. Right now, again, I'm grasping here to try to define that problem. And you can go through a whole nested set of examples here, but I think it comes back to the core of what we were talking about, that if I'm a startup, I'm not in the right circles. I don't know enough about what I should be doing in the earliest stages of what I'm building in order to, I can build product, but what else should I be doing? And then if I am a venture capital firm, I don't have the brand, I don't have the awareness of what it is that we're good at to attract those founders that really need help, and obviously capital. So that's
so you would say that building a network is the first problem. And then the second thing is, once you build a network, how do you manage the relationship between you and your community?
Well, it's building a network, but it's doing it in such a way that, I go from a few people I know to 10 people I know. I get, 2 to 10. And that those 8 people I've added to my network are helpful because I've spoken with them and they've shared some ideas with me. And then if you can do that for 4, 5, 6 different founders, and whether you're leveraging the same people, but then you've got 60, 70 people on board. And if a few of those are investors and they start looking at the founders that you brought on board for deal flow, then you've got some value that's being created here. And then you get all of that going and you grow that to 100 to 200 to 300. And then you have the bones of what's called an investment syndicate, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, definitely. We should talk about that. Any last words for founders, looking to maybe deal with pivoting, regardless of Web3, like whether let's say there are so many companies right now where their whole business model has been disrupted by ChatGPT, right? Like you wake up in the morning, a new technology has come that renders you irrelevant, or even if not irrelevant, makes life a lot harder for you. Do you have any kind of words of wisdom for those founders?
If you're pivoting, don't just do it because someone suggested, oh, hey, you should go out after this market. Do your homework, throw all your assumptions out the window, and redo your customer discovery from scratch. 30 if you're B2B, 100 if you're B2C. That's it.
So 100 customers that you talk to them, basically.
You talk to them and you ask them your set of same 10 questions that you're going to ask all 100 of them to gather the data on what their problem is that you can solve.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to create a survey today.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Pete. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Somi. That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to Somi for creating the mental space for us to have this discussion, and to Lola Ortiz for curating the best bits into the audio track. You can learn more about Somi and InPeak in our website, moneyneversleeps.ie. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it helps others to find the show. Thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for helping me put the finishing touches on this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 accelerator. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!
Money never sleeps, pal.